Alright, so hi guys. I am going to do the Chapter 2 practice test in my book. It's on page 301. I have the 12th edition of the college algebra test. So I just wanted to go through and show you how to do some of these questions. Okay, so the first question. It says to match the set described in column 1 with the correct interval notation from column 2. Okay, so let's look at A. Says we have the domain of f of x equals the square root of x plus 3. Okay, so remember domain is all our x values that the function can be, right? So are there any restrictions on our x values? All right, also here you can see your x is under a square root, right? So any number that's under a square root has to be greater than or equal to 0, right? Because you can't have a negative in your square root. So you can't have a negative. Let's see. Negative under the square root. Okay? So that means here our domain would mean that x has to be greater than or equal to 0. Okay? So how do we write that in interval notation? So remember, greater than or equal means that we have a square bracket, and as long as it's greater than or equal to 0, that means it can go up to an infinite number. So we have 0 to infinity, and we have the parentheses always around an infinity symbol. Okay? So that's for A. B is the range of f of x is equal to the square root of x minus 3. Okay, remember that the range is the y values that your function will have. Y values of the function. Okay, so if we're looking at this function, right? So we have x, we have y. Okay, so the parent function is that square root of x, right? Now remember, since we're doing the square root of x minus 3, so the square root of x function, we'll make that one, trying to make that one red. Okay, so the square root of x function looks something like that, right? If we want to do the square root of x minus 3, that since the minus 3 part is under the square root, we need to move our function to the right 3 points. So it's going to have the same shape, it's just going to go to the right, right? And so in our original square root of x function, this red one, right, our domain would be that x is greater than or equal to 0, right? And our range is that y is greater than or equal to 0, right? For our square root of x minus 3 function, right, it changed our domain, right? Our domain starts at x at 3 now, right? So our domain is that x needs to be greater than or equal to 3, but it hasn't changed our range, right? Our range is still that the minimum value of the function is 0, and it continues up into infinity. So our range is still the same of y is greater than or equal to 0. And again, in that interval notation, since it's greater than or equal to, we have the square bracket, and up to infinity, infinity always gets a parentheses. Okay? All right. So now we're going to go on to C. Okay. So question number 1. we're looking at 1C. So C says the domain of f of x equals x squared minus 3. Okay. All right. So you should hopefully remember what your x squared function looks like, right? So it looks something like that, right? This is our x squared, right? What does that minus 3 part do? Okay, so since it's kind of outside of that x squared function, right, before we had x minus 3 underneath this square root, and so that changed our function, moving it to the left or the right. But when we have and this minus 3 outside of the parent function, right? Then this tells me that this minus 3 part tells me that I'm going to move my function up or down. Okay? And since it's minus 3, that means I'm going to move my function down 3 points. I'll do red for this x squared minus 3. So we're going to move it down 3 points so that this is negative 3. And so again, here's my domain here is all the x values. Are there any restrictions on your x values here? You can see, right, looking left to right, no, it's going to take anything I put in for x will be okay. So the domain of this f of x equals x squared minus 3, the domain is going to be all real numbers, right? So that in interval notation is negative infinity up to positive infinity, okay? Now, if we look at D, they want the range of f of x equals x squared plus 3, okay? Again, that means our parent function is that x squared function, right? So again, that x squared, our x squared function goes like that. Okay? This is our x squared. Okay, now if we have that plus 3, again, it's outside of the parent function, right? This plus 3 is just adding 3 points up, right? So that means we're just going to go x squared plus 3 up here. Okay? And so remember, our range is our y values, right? So what is the minimum that this function goes to here? So the range here is from 3 up to infinity, right? And again, because it hits that point 3, we have a square bracket, okay? All right. Okay, I'm going to stop there with question 1. I'm going to go on to question 2 in the next video.